Richard Childress just accused a Cup Series driver of wrecking his car on purpose, and the radio tape proves he wasn't the only one who thought so. 3 crashes, 4 weeks, 2 drivers who now refuse to speak to each other, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why one team owner grabbed the radio and said the words, "That was blatant," and why NASCAR's final decision on this made almost nobody happy. Stay with me, because the ending of this story is not what most fans expected. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a NASCAR story like this one. Now let's break down exactly what happened at Chicagoland Speedway. Sunday at Chicagoland Speedway was supposed to be just another Cup Series race in the middle of a long summer stretch. Instead, it turned into the biggest storyline of the week, and it had nothing to do with who crossed the finish line first. Shane van Gisbergen and Austin Hill were racing deep in the field, both stuck around 28th place and fighting for position that, on paper, meant very little in the grand scheme of the race. But between these two drivers, nothing is ever really about the position on the leaderboard. It's about history, and Sunday, that history came to a head. Coming through turn 3, Hill moved his number 33 Chevrolet down the track, the same aero-blocking move drivers make dozens of times every single race to slow down the car behind them. It's routine. It's not aggressive. It's just racing. But Van Gisbergen, in the number 97 Chevrolet, did not lift. He carried his corner speed deeper than usual, stayed in Hill's tire tracks, and made contact with the left rear corner of Hill's car. Hill's Chevrolet snapped around and slammed into the outside wall. His race was over on the spot. NASCAR later confirmed Hill completed just 47 of the race's 267 laps before his day ended, and he was scored 37th, his second DNF in 3 weeks. Hill's team brought the car to pit road hoping for a quick fix, and for a moment it looked like he might rejoin the race. He didn't. Instead, Hill drove his battered Chevrolet straight at Van Gisbergen's car and hit it in the driver's door before finally taking it behind the wall for good. His own team could be heard pleading with him over the radio in the moment, telling him to think about the big picture. He didn't listen. And that single moment told you everything about how personal this had become. Richard Childress goes off on the radio. This is where the story stopped being about one racing incident and became one of the biggest talking points in the entire garage. Richard Childress, the Hall of Fame owner of Richard Childress Racing, got on his team's radio and did not hold back. Childress told his team it was payback for California, and moments later doubled down, calling the contact blatant and saying it was on purpose because of what happened weeks earlier at the Naval Base Coronado street race in San Diego. When someone on the radio questioned whether he was sure, Childress didn't hesitate. Hill's spotter, Derek Nealand, jumped in too, venting his own frustration about Van Gisbergen over the radio in the heat of the moment, a reminder of just how raw the emotions were inside that team's pit box while the caution flag was still flying. So now the obvious question: what exactly happened in California that made a NASCAR Hall of Fame team owner this convinced it was intentional? To understand that, we have to rewind a few weeks. Rewind where this rivalry really began. Van Gisbergen and Hill have a long-running edge between them that goes back to when both were competing full-time against each other in NASCAR's O'Reilly Auto Parts Series in 2024, dating back to their first real battles at Circuit of the Americas. It's a rivalry that never fully cooled off, and this season it followed both of them straight into the Cup Series. Hill only took over the number 33 car at Richard Childress Racing this year following the death of Kyle Busch, meaning every one of these incidents has unfolded during his very first stretch as a full-time Cup Series driver. That context matters because it means Hill has been under a brighter spotlight than usual every single week. The Pocono incident. The week before Chicagoland at Pocono Raceway, the two drivers tangled again. Hill slid up the racetrack out of the bottom groove while racing 3 wide, and the cars above him, including Van Gisbergen, got collected in the accident. It wasn't framed as deliberate on either side. It was just hard, tight racing that ended badly for both of them. On its own, that incident might have been forgotten within a week, but it didn't stay isolated for long, because 7 days later, something much bigger happened in San Diego. California. The incident that changed everything. This is the crash Richard Childress kept referencing on the radio, and once you understand it, his reaction at Chicagoland makes a lot more sense. NASCAR ran a street race at the Naval Base Coronado in San Diego, and on a restart, Hill was battling for the lead against Van Gisbergen's teammate, Connor Zilisch. Hill made contact with Zilisch, triggering a multi-car accident. Van Gisbergen, running right behind the wreck, had nowhere to go and was collected in the same crash. The result, both Trackhouse racing cars were torn up in a single afternoon, and Van Gisbergen's playoff position took a direct hit. Hill didn't dodge responsibility afterward, saying his rear brakes had locked up going into the corner. But Van Gisbergen wasn't in a forgiving mood. He blocked Hill's car on track so he couldn't simply drive away from the scene, declined to speak about Hill to reporters in the immediate aftermath, and a few days later posted a video where he referred to Hill as a spud, a not-so-subtle jab that made its way around the NASCAR internet fast. So by the time Chicagoland rolled around, you had two drivers who had already collided twice in 2 weeks, one public insult out in the open, and a car owner who was clearly done giving the benefit of the doubt. What both drivers said after the race. Hill was checked and released from the infield care center, and when reporters asked him directly what happened in turn 3, he kept it simple, saying everyone had already seen the replay and didn't need it explained to them. When a reporter pushed further and asked if he believed it was payback, Hill didn't take the bait. He said he had no idea. And when asked whether he wanted NASCAR to penalize Van Gisbergen, Hill stayed just as careful, saying that if there was definitive evidence, he'd leave it in NASCAR's hands rather than push for it himself. He also confirmed something that tells you everything about where this rivalry stands right now. The two drivers haven't spoken since the crash in San Diego, and by his own account, they simply don't see eye to eye. Van Gisbergen, on the other hand, said almost nothing about the contact itself in the immediate aftermath, only discussing how his car was handling under caution. He went on to finish the race in 25th place. Asked afterward if he'd talk things out with Hill, Van Gisbergen gave a response that told you exactly how he feels about the whole situation. He said he'd talk to him, but that Hill just grunts back. If you're waiting for the moment these two shake hands and move on, keep waiting, because based on everything both drivers have said, that moment isn't coming anytime soon. NASCAR's verdict and why it angered fans. Here's the part of this story that a lot of people are still talking about. NASCAR reviewed the contact using team radio, in-car cameras, and lap data before deciding it could not be proven to be 100% intentional. In this week's penalty report, NASCAR handed down no penalties to either Van Gisbergen or Hill. NASCAR's vice president of racing communications addressed the decision directly, explaining that officials looked at everything available: the radio chatter, the camera angles, even prior laps between the two drivers, and simply couldn't establish that the contact met the threshold for punishment. NASCAR also confirmed it still planned to sit down with both drivers to make sure the tension between them doesn't boil over into something even bigger down the road. Not everyone accepted that explanation. Fans quickly pointed to NASCAR's earlier penalty against driver Ryan Preece for a similar situation and called out what they saw as a double standard, arguing the sanctioning body didn't hold Van Gisbergen to the same standard it held other drivers to earlier this season. Even some of the biggest names in the sport weighed in. Denny Hamlin gave his own blunt take on the incident, predicting the situation was serious enough that NASCAR would eventually need to step in, a prediction that so far hasn't lined up with how NASCAR actually ruled. And in a detail that says a lot about where Van Gisbergen's head was at afterward, he showed up the very next week at Sonoma and dominated the field for the win, seemingly using all of that frustration in exactly the way a competitor should. What comes next? So where does that leave things between Austin Hill and Shane van Gisbergen? No penalties. No conversation between the two drivers since San Diego. No sign that either one is ready to let this go. NASCAR wants a meeting to cool things down, but if the last month has taught us anything, it's that these two find a way to collide again every single time they're on track together. Pocono, San Diego, Chicagoland, 3 incidents in 4 weeks and 0 resolution. The real question isn't whether these two will end up in the same conversation again, it's what happens the very next time they're racing for position with the white flag close and nobody willing to lift. If this rivalry has shown us anything, it's that the next chapter is already being written. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it when it happens.